Over the last few weeks, I have been thinking a lot about the golden rule. You know, the one we've all encountered at some point on our life's journey. The rule that is so familiar that all of us could probably recite it by heart. And that rule is, that's right, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, do you remember where you were when you first learned that rule? Sunday school? Home? Church? Anybody, church, anyone? Mother? Parents, okay, yeah. After hearing these answers, I think it's pretty safe to assume that the golden rule is a big part of our Christian culture. After all, it was one of Jesus' most well-known teachings, one that he passed down to the followers of his day. Next slide. You can see it up there. So the golden rule is one of the major teachings of Christianity. But did you know that this same teaching, this same rule, is found in a number of other faith traditions and belief systems too? Here, let me show you. Here's the golden rule as it's found in the teachings of the Buddhist faith. Here it is in Confucianism. Here it is in Taoism. Here it is in Sikhism. I think you get the idea, but we'll just keep the slides rolling until we get to the end where it says golden rule again, please. As the rest of these slides change, I'd like us to consider how amazing it is that all of these diverse faith traditions, whose teachings seem as different from each other as night is from day, could hold something like the golden rule in common. Here we have all these different religions that are embraced by many different people from many walks of life. These differences offer us the illusion that we couldn't possibly have anything in common with one another. And yet the golden rule is something that we seem to have found a common ground on which we can all agree. I like to imagine that the golden rule is like a seed planted in each and every one of us by something or someone greater than ourselves. The seed was planted in the soil of our minds and hearts by various teachers and teachings since the dawn of time, in the hopes that this seed would take root and grow into something that would guide us all in our efforts to live together in harmony. I like to imagine this, but one thought keeps this vision from being the warm and peaceful assurance that it should be. And the thought is this: if the golden rule exists in some form in the lives of all people, no matter what belief system they come from, if it is in fact the universal standard that we are all supposed to dedicate our lives to as a response to the faiths and beliefs that we hold dear, why do we find it so hard to get along with each other? Why do we spend so much time fighting over the things that make us different from one another? Why do we allow these differences to set us apart? Why do we allow ourselves to become so preoccupied with the differences between who we follow and what they have taught us to believe that we lose sight of this important rule and what it could mean to our ongoing relationships with one another? If we all agree that the golden rule is an important one to follow, Why do we allow it to become overshadowed by so many of these other matters in our lives? These were the questions posed by the Apostle Paul in the letter that he wrote to the people from the church in Corinth. In the part of the letter that we heard earlier, Paul is speaking to a Christian audience rather than a multi-faith one, but he is addressing the same issue: the inhospitable conditions that have emerged in this community regarding their faith, and how it was best to be lived out in their context. This was a community that Paul himself had spent much time and energy on during his ministry, because he had seen great potential in them when he first came upon them during his travels. He had spent much time teaching and preaching the ways of Jesus to them during that time. And by doing so, he was attempting to plant the seeds of faith in the people of that community. Seeds of love, of justice, of concern and compassion for others. All of the things that God wanted the people of the world to stand for in their lives. Paul had invested a great amount of attention in the faith development of this community, sowing these precious seeds in the minds and hearts of the people of Corinth. He and his fellow faith leaders, Apollos, who we heard about earlier, and others, had dedicated their lives to planting those seeds of faith in this community, all in the hopes that the people of the community would help to nurture them so that they could grow into something that would connect them to one another and to their God forever. But that's not what happened. Instead of taking these values to heart and making them part of their way of life, the people of Corinth had allowed themselves to become preoccupied with other priorities. They had become more concerned with who had taught them these wonderful ways than they were with the ways themselves. And they had become so busy with issues around identity and allegiance to one leader over another that they had forgotten what their new faith community was supposed to be all about. Instead of coming together around the guidelines and values that God had passed down to them through their faith, they were focusing on things that were putting them at odds with one another. As a result of this, the seeds of faith that should have been nurtured were being neglected, much to Paul's dismay. Paul responds to this counterproductive focus by expressing his disappointment in the people of Corinth for the way things have gone in his absence. He sharply rebukes them for the divisiveness that they have allowed to take root in their midst, because these divisions and the jealousy and quarreling that have resulted from them have come at the expense of the good things that Paul and his colleagues have tried to cultivate within and through the people as a community. He expresses his despair that these wonderful, life-giving lessons that he had taught them would not grow to full flower because this church, the Church of Corinth, had not had the maturity to nurture them in the ways they were expected to. But Paul does not stop there. He takes the time to offer the Corinthians a reminder of the sacred responsibilities that everyone in this community had to make this faith grow. He reminds them that while the leaders that they identify themselves with may have played an important part in their faith development, the part that each of these individuals played was actually done in partnership with one another, in an effort to bring about the common goal of building and growing a life-giving faith in the life of this community. Paul tells the people that he and his fellow leaders have always had the same goals in mind and have been working together all along to make these goals a reality. He also informs them, the people, that they have been given a part to play in this vision as well, and that they could best do so by letting what they had been taught to take root in their minds and their hearts. so that it could guide all their thoughts and actions in relation to one another in community. This was the only way that their faith could possibly grow. And somehow, someday, this faith would grow into something strong and something great in their lives. And that something was the love of God. God's love has been given to us as well, through teachings such as the Golden Rule. It is a gift that belongs to all of us, no matter what faith or belief system we have committed ourselves to and claim as our own. It is a gift that is meant to grow, that has been planted in our midst by various religious leaders and teachers from different faith traditions and practices, in the hopes that we might take those seeds of faith and actively nurture them in our relationships with one another, so that those ways of being might grow into something that would take on a life of its own and make the world a better place for us all. And even though we as a human race have not always lived out the Golden Rule to its fullest potential, the seeds of that sacred teaching are still there in our hearts. As Christians, as Muslims, as Jews, as Sikhs, as Buddhists, or whoever we are. And as long as we never lose sight of this teaching that is at the root of who we are to God and to one another, we can play our part in helping it to grow into something that breaks down whatever barriers have sprung up between us, so that we may become closer to one another. As our time of reflection comes to a close today, let us keep in mind the exercise that the children took part in earlier in the service. In a few weeks, as I promised them, I plan to bring the package of wheatgrass back to show the children the fruit of their labor. By that time, they may not remember which of them planted the seeds and which of them added the water. What I hope they will remember is that whatever has taken root and grown from that little packet was invited to grow through the work they did together. We can learn a lot from our children, even as we learn along with them, that the seeds of God's love have been planted in every human heart, and that these seeds can only grow to fullest flower if we all work together to nurture them in all that we are to each other, this day and always. Amen.